I was 24 years old, and to be honest, during this time in my life, I was going through depression, having some suicidal thoughts, very unhappy with the type of work I was doing, feeling a sense of, meaninglessness, purposelessness. And, looking back, I see how it was very much connected with me suppressing my voice and, not expressing myself because I thought, in order to survive, I have to do these jobs. And, we all know what it's like working within these systems. We often have to suppress our authentic self. So for actually 6 months before my illness, I would have these incredibly vivid nightmares or night terrors where it felt like I was being strangled by this very angry woman, and I would wake up, in the dream. She was darker. She may represent a part of my shadow aspect. She also reminded me of, an indigenous looking woman, which that's something which becomes very important to me later on in my work. However, I had these repeated nightmares, didn't know what they meant, but they were foreshadowing this major crisis and illness. And in the dream, in several dreams, she's holding up this red shirt, kind of motioning for me to put this on. And I'm like, I don't like the red shirt, and that to me represents blood, the massive amounts of blood that I lost during this illness. So, and then another interesting piece, dreams play heavily into my work and my spiritual path. But I actually did dream that I had a cyst in my vocal cords. And in my dream, I was trying to remove it. This was something that didn't belong. And this is where the whole infection started. So during this time, I thought I just had the flu. It was the only 2 weeks I was without health insurance in my life. So I went to the hospital, and guess what? They turned me away. You're fine, you're overreacting. So when I went home, I thought that was a death sentence because I knew something was seriously wrong with my body. And I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time. I called my parents up, said, please come get me. I don't want to die alone here. They brought me back to Colorado Springs. And because I had just been to the hospital, they thought, well, we'll see if you get better. So for several days, I was literally in and out of consciousness in excruciating pain. Most pain I've ever been in my life, so painful to swallow. And I knew I was going to die. And I was reflecting on, the love I would never have in my life, the things I, wouldn't get to do. And then there was a moment where all of a sudden my heart just started pounding so quickly. And I thought, this is it. Now I'm really dying. So I called out to my parents. They took me to the hospital. I went to Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs, and they saved my life, these nurses and doctors. But on the way, I was unconscious already. And by that point, I had gone into complete septic shock. A lung had collapsed. And so when the doctors, this part's a little graphic, so trigger warning, but when they cut in to give me a tracheotomy so I could breathe again, they realized it was the flesh-eating bacteria because dead tissue was spilling out. And they would not tell my parents until later, till I survived, that I really only had about a 1% chance of surviving. Because oftentimes what happens is someone will get this very fast-acting flesh-eating bacteria, and they'll have to amputate, because it's that serious. So for myself, when this happened, there was a ring that started around my throat. Again, that sense of strangulation that I was dreaming about for months, and then very quickly moved to my chest, my lungs. That's when a lung collapsed and it went down to my torso. So for 3.5 weeks, I was in a medically induced coma. And I did not clinically die, but I do remember consciously making a choice. And I had 3 big dreams that really were profound and still influence the direction of my life, I would say. One of the dreams felt like almost like an in-between realm where it felt like I was in this underground cavern floating on water. There was this, very interesting music and kind of a sense of distortion or not quite being in my body. And it felt like a kind of a waiting area, but also there was an awareness of definitely being in kind of a different reality or realm. The other dreams were very much indicative of what was happening to my body on a physical, emotional, spiritual level, even. I was being tortured and dismembered. And this is very similar to a lot of indigenous cultures talk about shamanic initiation and dismemberment and this feeling of being pulled apart. And I'm not claiming to be, a shaman or anything like that. I'm just merely pointing out some similarities in these ancient traditions of confrontations with death, confrontations with losing one sense of embodied identity and how powerful that transformation is. So that was another dream. And I definitely felt, the support of my family. Even though I wasn't awake, I remember some loved ones on the other side, feeling their presence, feeling that love. And especially when I woke from that coma, really felt that love from my ancestors. But the biggest dream I had, and the dream which I feel like is a part of my mission, and my work as a counselor, involved what some might describe, and I don't claim to be an expert or to know. It could be another life, another part of myself, living another dimension. It could be a past life. But this experience was so real. It very much felt like I lived an entire lifetime as another person, but with my soul, similar qualities, except I was Asian. And I was trapped on this ship, this large ship out in the middle of the ocean, filled with slaves. And they weren't just slaves, they were female sex slaves. And I was older, I was in my 40s, and I hated myself because my role was bringing these women onto the ship and kind of, how do I say, managing them in a way. And women weren't allowed to look at one another, weren't allowed to speak. And so there was this incredible feeling of loneliness, isolation, and being trapped. There was no communication allowed, but this woman appeared and we locked eyes. And there was this incredible sense of empathy, connection, deep understanding of another's pain and suffering. And I recognized this woman as my sister. And, later I would learn that sometimes when the medication from being in the coma would wear off, I would come out of that state and I would lock eyes with my sister, my biological sister, my family. So I don't know if that maybe had some influence, but to me, this was a turning point, not only within this dream realm, but a turning point in me making the choice to come back to this reality. And so we began just from this simple connection, secretly planning to help liberate the other women on the ship, ourselves. And there was this feeling of hope, of connection, of aliveness again. And so I love telling this story because I can see, even this happened when I was 24, I'm almost 40 now, but I can see the power of that dream and how that's still impacting my life. Right now, all over the world, there's so many women that are oppressed in different ways, whether that be, the inequality of men and women in other countries, poverty, human trafficking, or objectification. And for myself, I had really struggled with what it is to be a woman, the role of that. And I, in many ways, resented, kind of being pushed into a certain role. And so as I've worked with more and more people, I'm just humbled, and it's profound, the power of, women, but also men coming together and telling their stories of the pain, the suffering they've endured, and the healing that can come from that. Because when one person speaks up and shares, that gives another person courage. And that really is the only way to break the cycle of abuse, because the silence of the survivors keeps that power structure in place, keeps that abuse in place. So, as a counselor, I feel just so honored to be able to witness and hold space for these sacred stories of what people have endured and how they've survived. And I feel, grateful that I get to share my story with you and your audience, to hopefully inspire hope. I don't think one necessarily needs to approach death to have a spiritual experience, but I think each person has the capacity to experience love, relief, spiritual transcendence, connection through facing our own internal suffering and the things that we feel we must suppress in order to fit into society or survive or function. So that's a big part of my story and journey.